Thank you. Yes, the title of my paper today, the Geddes and Philosophy, the Roots, the Aftermath. It's a great pleasure and honour to be invited to talk here in Yamaguchi on such a stimulating topic, among such distinguished company, and of course on such an auspicious occasion. With this short presentation, I will trace a path or conduit through Geddes' thinking with the intention of enlightening the lived character of his philosophical approach and the resultant implications or aftermath. I should open by averting the possibility that the title of this paper, Geddes and Philosophy, the Roots, the Aftermath, is read as something of a pragmatic contradiction that stands in opposition to the Gedesian generalist approach. The focus on philosophy within this paper is not limited to the Western academic tradition, but rather approaches the subject in the spirit of Geddes, understanding it as an integrated methodology within which actions, projects, are as much an articulation of philosophy as our writings. Moreover, the word roots in the title attempts to reflect the position of the natural world that occupies this area. And in turn, it draws an elliptical reference to Geddes' work in the field of biology and his tenure at Dundee University. Other notions of root or rootedness are equally relevant, specifically those which relate to the modalities of place. For Geddes' approaches place as being the totality of constituent elements. The particularity of Geddes' concern is revealed in the following comment Geddes makes in relation to the notation of life diagram, or thinking machine. Here, in the diagram, the study of place grows into geography, that of work into economics, that of folk into anthropology. But these are commonly studies apart, or in separate squares, touching only at a point. Witness the separate chairs and institutions and learned societies of each name. But here we have to bring them into a living unison. Place being situated and understood within a living unison makes explicit the interdeterminating formation and intent of the Gedesian maxim workplace folk, where the coalescing of any of two of the terms assists in the constitution of the third. Thus, the configuration of this fundamental triad, with its humanized nomenclature and mutual dependency, sees Geddes firmly positioned within a cultural setting concerned with the philosophical reawakening of the conditions of place. Within the Western philosophical discourse, place had been sidelined or outrightly admitted since the death of Leibniz. Over a period of 150 years, the rationality of space had almost entirely eclipsed any philosophical notion of place. Its synthetic nature, between qualitative lived experience and quantitative physical extension, was not easily accommodated within the rationality of the prevailing philosophical systems. The spell of the purely rational was broken by Henry Bergson's Latin thesis in 1888, Aristotle's conception of place. In returning to the classical roots of place, Bergson laid the foundations for an understanding of place as a product of synthesis. Geddes' position within this philosophical avant-garde is made increasingly conspicuous as the preceding quote continues. Place studies without work or folk is a matter for atlases and maps. Folk without place and work are dead. Hence, anthropological collections and books contain too much of mere skulls and weapons. As alluded to in my opening, Geddes' relationship with place can be seen to arise from and intimately linked to his work in the biological sciences. It is through this discipline that his proto-sociological ideas emerged, which asserted the mutuality of persons and their environment. Geddes related the biological evolutionary process explicitly to the constitution of the metropolis, with the title of his famous publication, Cities in Evolution. And in doing so, he suggested a parallel between the natural and social spheres. The directionality of this symbiotic conjecture is not horizontal. The city is understood through a comparative model of organism, and yet its constituent elements, persons, have free will and the capacity to reflect and in turn alter their own path, and by extension that of their city. Furthermore, this positioning relating nature to the built and social sphere also advances Geddes' essential transcendental speculation of a teleological reading of the evolutionary process. It is relevant to consider the relationship between Geddes and the French philosopher Henri Bergson. in order to move towards a comprehension of the meta-functionality of evolution for Geddes. His interest in Bergson was multifarious, but the articulation of the basis of evolution as élan vital, which found form in Bergson's 1907 text, Creative Evolution, is key, to the extent that Geddes, in his co-authored book with J. Thomson, Evolution of 1912, say that Bergson's The Creative Evolution was the greatest advance in evolutionary theory. The élan vital, an immaterial force unverifiable by science, stands in opposition to the mechanistic basis of natural selection. And as the title of Bergson's book suggests, evolution is characterized by a creative impulse. This is in marked resonance with Geddes' unwillingness in the above text to accept that evolution is a matter primarily of struggle and death. Furthermore, this line of thought can be seen to have influenced his web of life system, which similarly utilizes a pervading metaphysical impetus. Yet to fundamentally attribute an unseen force to all living processes opens up the questions of appreciation and interaction. How is one to realize this metaphysical constituent of the universe? If it is indeed meta-empirical, and if it is in operation above a material level, how does it interact with that level? If we return to the notation of life thinking machine, it may be possible to discern Geddes' path through this Bergsonian-related problem and the profundity of their evident continuity. In the diagram, Geddes differentiates between the active and passive components of mental life. From the mapping of the lower left-hand square of subjective life, experience, feeling, sense, onto the right-hand squares, there's a transcendental shift into ideation and imagination, within which also rests the place of religion and mysticism. Thus we can see the structural possibility of an understanding which is based in the immanence of the subjective and objective realms, but which reaches beyond these. Yet we must avert the possibility that we understand any of these elements in isolation. As Geddes repeatedly asserts, the flow of human experience is captured in the diagram, and that every single area is related, implied, and conditional on the others. If we turn to Geddes' friend Swami Vivekananda, we can discern the connections between his Vedic Hindu approach and Geddes' own. Where is there any more misery for him who sees his oneness in the universe, his oneness of life, oneness of everything? This separation between man and man, man and woman, man and child, nation from nation, earth from moon, moon from sun, this separation between atom and atom is the cause really of all the misery. And the Vedanta says this separation does not exist. It is not real. It is merely apparent on the surface. In the heart of things, there is unity still. This thinking undoubtedly unfolds into Geddes' own method, and also typifies the way in which his thought arises through the mirroring of a multitude of cultural and intellectual relations. Moreover, the characterization of transcendent through the thought depicted in the notation of life thinking machine connects on the deepest level with the twin bases of knowledge in the Hindu Vedic tradition. There, the taxonomy of knowledge is split between that which comes from the five senses and that which is the result of yogic engagement. The former being classified as science, the latter supersensuous knowledge, known as the Vedas. This supersensuous knowledge provides a basis for appreciating, understanding the complete connectivity and interdependence within the universe. Geddes' interest in the Vedic tradition was not merely academic or superficial. Following his meeting with the above-quoted Swami Vivekananda, Geddes apparently passed on yogic exercises to his children. The diagram also relates, this is the notation of life diagram, also relates to another profound sense to this Hindu Vedic tradition, which we will come to presently. But first, it is interesting to note the similarities between the yogic knowledge and Bergson's notion of intuition, which similarly enlightens the fundamental constitution of the universe. Bergson too contended that the intellect has limited capacity to apprehend the totality or primordial nature of the universe. In effect, we need to sidestep or transcend our conditioning as an effect of evolution, which he felt compelled us to conceive of thought and thinking in spatial terms. To this, Bergson advocated the method of engagement through intuition, upon the thing itself as opposed to thinking around it. The way in which we can actually relate to this essence is to consider our own experience. All perceptions are given in duration, and that becomes the primordial concern of intuition. Yet we are not limited to the limits of our immediate duration perceptions. Rather, the spreading propensity of the mind can connect the continuity of durations from the brute of simple matter to the infinite spirit. Thus, within ourselves, like Swami Vivekananda states, there is a totality, the all-encompassing unity of the universe. Yet a criticism levelled against Bergson by Merleau-Ponty may apply to Geddes' utilisation of a metaphysical impetus to evolution. Ponty felt that Bergson, having stated the transcendent potential of intuition, which concerns the world prior to the objects of science, then in turn assumes the position of the absolute observer's viewpoint, thereby negating or stupefying the metaphysical contention. As Ponty puts it, if, for Bergson, intuition really makes us transcend the world, it is because Bergson is not aware of his own presuppositions, and of that simple fact that all we live in is lived against the backdrop of the world. In this much, we can appreciate that Geddes' methodology is rooted in an empirical means, both the biological and sociological fields, which places thought directly in this lived world, in a way in which Bergson didn't. This is not necessarily a vindication of Geddes' utilization and transference of his theological reading of evolution, yet it does illustrate the stronger basis that Geddes has to make such contentions compared to Bergson, and that the application of them would constitute an empirical testing of their validity. Returning to the notation of life thinking machine, underlying the physical diagram is a further clear statement of Gedesian's fundamental engagement to the East-West synthesis of thought. As can be seen, the essential structure is that of the swastika, or rather svastika in Sanskrit. Su meaning good, asti meaning to be, and ka is a suffix. The symbol has a multitude of cultural significance, but is particular relevance within Hinduism. Indeed, the form is thought to have originated with the Vedic Hindu tradition and spread to other Indic religions, including Buddhism. The counterclockwise version that Geddes uses is common to Hinduism, as is the clockwise form, and it is exclusively in Buddhism, where the clockwise form is not to be found. Within Hinduism, this counterclockwise form represents involution of the universe. The propensity of the symbol to transgress religious and cultural boundaries must have resonated with Geddes' expansive approach. Indeed, I understand the symbol is found extensively in Japan, known as manji, and is used in town plans to locate Buddhist temples. The inherent movement that is encapsulated by the swastika motif is evident in other Geddes objects. With the outlook tower, the sense of progression is instrumental in its functioning. Starting at the top with the outlook from the roof terrace, the observer moves through to the camera obscura and continues to descend, encountering progressive levels that focus on the Edinburgh, Cal, the region, and global context. The bodily effect of such progression may be interpreted as significant. Consider in comparison the unrealized Musée Croissant Illimité by Le Corbusier in 1939. The spiral-form museum was designed so that there was a palpable kinesthetic experience of moving through time being depicted spatially, and the construction mirrored this possibility in its capacity of unlimited structural extension as the collection grew through time. Yet what this plan also demonstrates is the inherent risks of stipulated directionality in the forming of a museum or thinking machine. For as one person progresses through the Corbusier museum, the destination appears to be dead-ended, a literal cul-de-sacing of history, where one moves to the centre of the spiral. Where does one go from there? Geddes was evidently aware of this fundamental implication of movement, that of terminus. For in discussion of the notation of life diagram, he states, where does the fourth quarter lead? To the first again, or a fifth if you prefer. That is, the world is remade by effective men of action, becomes in turn the environment that shapes other men, stimulates their mental life, which in turn leads them on to change the world still further. Thus we are invited to actually conceive of the notation of life diagram extended through three, or if we are so inclined and don't mind conflating space and time in 4 dimensions, as it proliferates and modifies thought through temporal and spatial durations. And so too with the Outlook Tower. One starts, as the name suggests, at the outlook from the roof terrace, progressing to a room housing a camera obscura, operating as the Olympian microscope on the metropolis below, and concluding with the visitor re-entering the bustling streets of the Edinburgh Old Town. This thinking machine is a provocative hiatus of consciousness within the urban, moving by means of a disembodied seer, the camera obscura, to the reintegration in the living sphere. And between these points is the unfolding of context from a local, regional, and global perspective. This utilisation and interrogation of actual space with theoretical and practical thought creates a total museum of place. Its interconnections extend in all directions, but are firmly rooted to its situation in Edinburgh. As Geddes says of it, our greatest need today is to grasp life as a whole, to see its many sides in their proper relations, but we must have a practical as well as a philosophic interest in such an integrated view of life. Hence the contribution this tower towards understanding life is purely visual, for from here everyone can make a start towards seeing completely that portion of the world he can survey. In extrapolating from this particular thinking machine, we can see continuity through other instances and manifestations where the position of the individual in relation to these specific places mirrors such a movement. That is, the shift from a particular individuated self to its integration with a social global realm. It is not that the self becomes subsumed in the social. Instead, an enlightened consciousness is conditioned to ascertain the place of the individual in relation to the multitude. The individual remains as a primary necessary presence. It is therefore unsurprising to hear of Geddes's collaborations and connections to such figures as Kropotkin and Ilya Reclus. Their social anarchism similarly asserts the individual in relation to an environmental context, a liberation of self through a voluntary realization of the benefits of social amalgamation. Yet perhaps we can trace this idea further back to the Scottish philosopher David Hume and his theory of enlightened self-interest. When each individual perceives the same sense of interest in his fellows, he immediately performs his part of any contract as being assured that they will not be wanting in theirs. All of them by concert enter into a scheme of actions calculated for common benefit. The echo between these views and how Martin Miller, the biographer of Kropotkin, describes Kropotkin's experiences of the watchmakers in the Jura Mountains in Switzerland is particularly relevant. There was no doubt in his mind that the community would work because it was not a matter of imposing an artificial system, but of permitting the natural activity of the workers to function according to their own interests. In this context, we can see Geddes providing a similar condition of social empowerment, one that emphasized the importance of a sense of and attention to geography and locales. It's unfortunate that so many of Geddes's projects have remained solely on the page, and so cannot be considered much more than thinking models. But to conclude, I wish to look briefly at the Grassmarket Garden, one of his most simple projects, and consider it analogously with an ongoing project by the Danish art collective N55 titled Land. The Grassmarket Johnson Terrace Garden was simple in its means, but was profound in its presence. Geddes moved into the area of the old town of Edinburgh at a time when it was a far from desirable place to stay, essentially a slum ravaged by the blight of inner city poverty. Geddes's project was simple in creating a garden and a place amongst the tenements at the westport end of the Grassmarket. The garden was functional on a variety of levels. It provided food for those who tended it. It was a teaching locale to instruct the young of the old town in practical biology and horticulture, and it was a meditative location which was out with the confines of the old town. Yet its overarching strength is that the way in which it achieves these effects without didactic or prescriptive means, it was what it fundamentally was, a garden. It adhered to these principles of anarchism that allow the freedom of the individual to be realized in the conditions most conducive to circumstances. It is in these aspirations that we can find N55's project and sympathy. I'm not claiming them as part of any conscious Gedesian lineage, for I am unaware of their extent of influence or even knowledge of Geddes and his ideas. Yet land has been operational for a number of years, and it functions like the garden in the most simple but not simplistic way. The exact protocols for land are specified on the website, but essentially anyone with legal rights to a parcel of land can designate it part of land. I quote here from their online manual from land. The introduction. Land gives access to land. Any person can stay in land and use it. Construction. Land is constructed from pieces of land in different places in the world. The various parts are added to land by persons who guarantee that anyone can stay in land and use it. Any person can initiate expansions of land. The geographical positions of land can be found in Manual for Land. Using land. Any person can use land. Attention is directed to the logical relation between persons and the rights of persons. Persons should be treated as persons and therefore as having rights. If we deny this assertion, it goes wrong. Here's a person, but this person should not be treated as a person. Or, here's a person who should be treated as a person, but not as having rights. Therefore, we can only talk about persons in a way that makes sense if we know that persons have rights. Expanding land. Land can be expanded by anybody who wants to add pieces of land to land. Formally, the parts of land remain the property of the persons participating in this way, but they guarantee that any person can stay in land and use it. By informing N55 of the position, a cairn will be put to mark the place, and the position of the land will be distributed through the manual. One of the most significant aspects of this project is the fact that participation within land does not implicate any specific ideology. Rather, the land is apolitical. It allows ideology to emerge through usage of that place. The sentiments in both the gesture of this reclassification and potential it implies provides a continuation of the essence of Geddes' understanding, that our connection to place is fundamental and is a result of the lived world, our lived world. Thank you.
I'm quite fascinated by your example of land. Would you like to say a little more about how a group of artists in Denmark have been sort of unconsciously influenced by Geddes? I mean, for example, you'd asked them, do you know about Lewis Mumford? And this is quite a common thing for me, that when I meet people who seem to be working out some kind of a Gedesian plan, that when you say to them, Lewis Mumford, they know Lewis Mumford, but they don't know Patrick Geddes. Would you say that might be the case?
Yeah, that's certainly the case with N55. They'll certainly talk freely of Kropotkin and Mumford and people like that, but kind of haven't traced that context further back to Geddes. But I did a project with them a while back, and that was their first introduction to Gedesian thinking, and I think that sort of certainly connected a lot of their ideas.
なんかランドの例を挙げられたことがすごく面白かった、興味深く聞きましたということで、そこにゲディス的な考え方というのが意識されずに取り入れられていて、なんかそういうような例は他にもなんかデンマークとかでもなんかちょっと分からなかったルイス・モンフォートという人とかあるみたいなんですけれども、 質問は何だったの？そういうコメントがあって、それに対して、ギャビンさんの方から、そうですというようなことで、何度の場合に無意識的にというか、ゲディスから影響を受けてるっていうふうには自覚はないですね。というぐらいしかちょっと私には分からなかったんですが、佐藤先生に何かお聞きになることは。
Yeah, I was very interested in what you're saying, Gavin. You mentioned the two gardens, the Johnson Terrace Garden and the West Port Garden. I just wondered whether you would consider exploring the locations of the other gardens within the context of an art project.
Yeah, no, I think there certainly is a lot of mileage in this utilisation of the garden as I guess it could be seen as an extension of a thinking machine and dealing fundamentally on a practical level. It's I think its ability to integrate those aspects that Geddes was so interested in, the biological and the social, make it particularly pertinent.
庭のことでしたから、ちょっと私ほとんどよく分からなかったので、どうしましょう。庭のプロジェクト。
私も質問ちょっと庭の名前がちょっと聞き取れなかったんですが、基本的にはこのモリソンさんのオリジナルの考えというか、そのノーテーションブライト性の図式を自分なりにこう解釈をして、考えを作られているということをおっしゃっていた。Can I ask one question? I'm also quite interested in the project of land, and I think it's quite, how can I say, utopian project, because usually land is owned by somebody, and quite a lot of conflict within the society. We can't, throw away all of the issue. How is it possible to apply these projects or this idea into a real world?
Well, I think for N55, they would see them absolutely as operating in the real world. The instances of land that already exist are located all around the world, and they have on their website they have details of how to find them. And people do go and use them. There are some in cities, some in the country, and because there is this, in a sense, utopian, but also getting back to this notion of apolitical, or rather extraction of the political in the immediate. When anybody goes to use land, there's not a specific ideology in place, so that it could be that land becomes a totalitarian state by those who then take it over. It retains a sort of provocative neutrality in that sense. But yes, I think these projects do exist in the world and they are active, so I guess they'd be quite pleased.
Thanks for that. Actually, I didn't know that.
Okay.
私の質問は今のこのランドっていうのが 今そのユートピア的という言い方をしたんですが、実際の社会はその土地というのは個人なり誰かが所有していて、でその中にいろいろな問題っていうのがあるというのが前提だと思うんですけど、こういう社会っていうのが実際の社会に考えっていうのが応用できるんですかっていうちょっと意地悪な質問をしたんですが、それに対して実際こういう仕組みをとっている、特にそういう個別のイデオロギーを持ったということではなくて、誰でも使えるよっていうようなこういうプロジェクトっていうのは世界のあちこちにあるというふうにおっしゃってます。ですからそのユートピアではなくて実際にあるリアルなものですというお答えでした。で私も知りませんでしたので非常に勉強になりました。Thank you very much.
And so, can anybody go to the land and use it as they like? So, for example, is it okay for them to cultivate the land and grow vegetables and so on?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
One question which relates to the articulacy of tradition about land ownership. This is a Danish-sponsored venture. Its first roots, to use your word, it was started in Denmark.
Denmark and Sweden, yeah. They're a collective base between Copenhagen and Malmo.
They have, for example, very different land ownership patterns to Scotland. And I think that one of the things about this kind of thing, it would almost be impossible for Patrick Geddes to sustain a project like this in a country like Scotland, where you've got countries like Sweden. As far as I know, in Sweden, most of the land is owned by the state.
But I think this is one of the key points of land. There's no change in ownership for land. It's only a designation of the ability to use it as you wish. There's not actually any legal transference of rights involved in it at all.
But I find it very interesting, that the idea has been born or articulated in a country where there's a much more mutual ownership of land. I mean, in the context of Scotland, you have vast empires held by one or two individuals. So it's very interesting, to impart that to the audience here about the different land ownership structures.
I think this is something very pertinent to land. I did help them realize a version of land in Texas, and their attitude to land ownership is about as proprietorial as you could get. There was a lot of people couldn't understand what it would mean to allow people free access to a piece of land. Where when you're traveling across the Texan desert, even though there's nothing for as far as you can see, there's still no trespassing signs on the side of the road. So yeah, I think these contexts of the different modalities of ownership are exceptionally pertinent to the project.
Thank you.
まずデンマークとかスウェーデンでそういうことが行われているのを知っているけれども、それはデンマークとスウェーデンのその土地所有の形態はスコットランドの土地所有の形態と非常に違っていて、その所有権の問題ですね、土地の。それが、スウェーデンなんかではほとんどの土地は国家に属しているんじゃないかとか、だからそれはやっぱり同じことはスコットランドはうまくいかないんじゃないかというようなことでしたけれども、ランドはだからこそ土地の所有権はどこにも移らないということを、もともとの所有者のものだということはそれは変わらないわけですね。そこを非常に強調していると。それからテキサスの例をちょっと挙げられたんですが、よく分からなかったんですが、テキサスでは道の砂漠みたいなところで道しかなくて何にもないようなところがそういうランドに指定されているところがあるっていうような、なんか使い道もないようなところっていうか。 というぐらいしか分からなかったですが。
I've been working on with the Johnson Terrace Garden on some of the restoration of it, and it might be possible to put them in touch directly with land and see if Johnson Terrace could be do a land project there. That would be a good circle to.
Yeah, it certainly would. Actually, one of the members of N55 is on a residency program in Japan at the moment, so there's another connection there.
I just wanted to mention also in terms of Toshiko Ando's point or question about what Geddes' role in the Edinburgh Social Union and what was achieved. I think the Johnson Terrace Garden and other gardens in Edinburgh are interesting in terms of the real world question, that they form the basis really for the kindergarten movement, and it's one of the reasons why Edinburgh in particular has today a very good quality of nursery provision. So there's a kind of lasting social basis there that's really worth noting. And I hadn't realised, in fact, the connection with Sister Nivedita and Frobel, which I think is very interesting there and worth a lot more research.
Thank you.
すみません、私もちょっと細かいところまでは分かんないんですが、今のその土地のいろいろなその所有とかこのプロジェクトの話に関連して、そのゲディスの事例でいうと、先ほどの発表の中で出てきてたそのソーシャルユニオンというそういう仕組みを作っているですとか、そのキンダーガーデンプロジェクト。チャールズガーデン。
It's the German word, kinder.
キンダーガーデン、プロジェクトというようなそういうプロジェクトをゲディスが行っているっていうのがそのつながりとしてあるんじゃないかということだと思います。
それでは、モリソンさんどうもありがとうございます。Thank you very much.
これで一応今日の会議は終わりですが、6時から隣の、選挙の食堂でレセプションがありますので、どうぞ皆さん参加をなさってください。学生500円、ぜひ参加してください。それから大人と普通の人間3000円だ、そうです。それから明日は10時半からここではありません。ワイカムで行われます。そういう以上、ちょっと英訳。So today's meeting is just over. So but from 6 o'clock, so we organizing committee will have a reception at the restaurant next to this building. That direction. So it's a new building. So yeah, maybe so we can drink a lot of beer, more 10 pints. Right. And I'm talking about tomorrow's plan. Tomorrow, so the place is not here, but the Wycombe Yamaguchi Center for Arts and Media. Yeah. Anyway, from 10:30, tomorrow, this meeting will continue. So please, everybody join us. Yeah, thank you very much. Stay safe.